Optimizing the classroom of the 21st century. The next generation is the future of our society. It is of paramount importance to develop a system where equity is held at the highest regard. As students ourselves, we see firsthand the inequitable effects of the fixed education system around us. There are a wide variety of factors that go unnoticed by the majority of the public, factors whose influence on student success remains wholly outside the student's individual control.
Due to the lack of awareness for this topic, the goal of our research is to dismantle the barriers standing in the way of not only student achievement, but student well-being as a whole. To accomplish this, relevant data, tools, and statistical techniques were first required.
The materials and methods in our investigation encompass the data origins, variables, data handling process, and the evaluation of our indicators. The data used for this analysis originates from a multitude of sources in the US due to the multivariate nature of the analysis. Statewide data originating from the years 2015 to 2017 was mined, as these years contain the most overlapping of data for the multiple variables.
To measure academic performance, standardized test scores were used due to their encompassing and impartial nature. Because of this, data for the SAT and ACT was collected. We also used dropout rates as an indicator of student well-being, and therefore the respective data was obtained. From the National Center of Educational Statistics, classroom population sizes, average teacher salaries, household demographics, and school revenue were obtained. Funding available to high schools per person, also known as education appropriations, was collected from SHEEO.
To prepare the datasets, Microsoft Excel was used to remove unnecessary columns and white spaces. Python and its various libraries were used to process these datasets. Tableau and Seaborn were also utilized to create scatter and geographical plots.
For the analysis, only ACT scores were used. Given that 2.03 million students had written the ACTs and 1.8 million students had written the SATs, the ACTs provided a much more accurate representation of average student performance in the US in 2017.
In our analysis, we will cover the initial project hypothesis, the simple linear regression relationships, and the multiple linear regression relationships. As falsifying evidence has more merit than supporting evidence, we chose to direct our research towards rejecting the null hypothesis, which would support the existence of a relationship. Our hypothesis thus asserted that the factors in our study would have no statistically significant effect on education quality, as measured by ACT scores and dropout rates.
To perform simple linear regressions, the variables were first examined to identify any noteworthy relationships. Pearson values were calculated for high-interest variables and plotted on a correlation matrix, as shown in the figure. Linear regression in the form of scatter plots was performed on the selected factors with ACT scores and dropout rates serving as the two dependent variables. Despite the moderately strong Pearson values between several of the variables, the LR models exhibited moderate to low R-squared values. An explanation for this is that the data was inherently complex, coming from human behavior. The significance of the relationships was supported by p-values, which were found to be consistently less than 0.05, and thus the null hypothesis was safely rejected. Due to the p-values, it's clear that a deeper investigation into the variables was required. As such, we conducted multiple linear regression analysis on the data to better interpret the systems of interconnected variables.
In order to carry out the MLR analysis, the data set required additional cleaning. All NA values were replaced with the corresponding column's median. Next, the dataset was tested for multicollinearity, as significant linear correlations between the independent variables would result in an inaccurate model. Stats models' variance inflation factors were employed for this task, and any variable exhibiting a number above 5 were removed. Two data frames were then prepared with ACT scores and dropout rates as the dependent variables. The ordinary least squares regression model was utilized, given that the data displayed linear trends.
After repeated training of the model, 4 variables remain statistically significant as seen in the table. An adjusted R-squared value of 0.712 was calculated, demonstrating that this model is more appropriate when accounting for how one variable is affected by other factors. It is important to note that all calculated coefficients for the MLR produce similar trends to the simple linear regressions. The model predicted that an increase in teacher performance results in higher average student performance. A possible explanation for this trend is that the teachers are motivated to perform better if their skill sets have a higher monetary value, thereby leading to better teaching performance. A recent poll in 2018 found that 60% of the American population believes that teachers are not paid what they are worth. Taking this information into account, it can tentatively be concluded that the teacher performance is likely connected to student performance.
Increases in class sizes were correlated with decreases in ACT scores. A higher class size results in a higher teacher-to-student ratio. Therefore, as the population of a class increases, it is feasible to assume that individual student performance decreases due to insufficient interaction with the teacher.
With respect to the percentage of students with internet access, a positive relationship was found. The impact of technology in the context of education has become increasingly pronounced as schools steadily incorporate digital learning techniques into their curricula. Resultantly, a student's access to the internet plays a substantial role in their ability to attain academic success. Espousing these views, an Oklahoma-based study found that districts with better access to technology at home seem to perform better across grades and subjects.
Contrary to the results for educational appropriations, intuition would suggest that an increase in funding would induce students to perform better on examinations. Due to this, the relationship was deemed spurious, and the association is likely due to the presence of other unseen factors. In support of this argument, when conducting MLR with dropout rates as the dependent variable, educational appropriations was found to be statistically insignificant due to its p-value, and as a result, it was not considered in the second model.
A second MLO model was trained using dropout rates as the dependent variable. An adjusted I-squared value of 0.469 was obtained for the model. The fit of the model was considered adequate in spite of the lower I-squared value, as the data deals with human behavior and is consequently subject to unaccountable variance. For teacher salaries, a negative relationship was found in which an increase in teacher salaries resulted in a decrease in dropout rates. Increased wages may incentivize teachers to increase their teaching quality. For example, teachers may find new teaching methods that engage their students in learning. Fundamentally, this will improve a student's educational experience, reducing their probability of dropping out.
A positive relationship between class sizes and dropout rates was also found. This trend may be explained by students finding it challenging to learn where they are unable to frequently interact with their teacher. With this disadvantage, many students perform poorly in school and may ultimately choose to drop out.
A negative relationship was found for the percentage of households with internet access. The negative trend suggests that students without household internet access may have a higher likelihood of dropping out. In modern society, many essential learning materials are available online. The unavailability of these resources will result in students losing their ability to succeed in school, possibly leading them to dropping out.
A noteworthy observation is that the variables present in the second MLR model were statistically significant in the ACT scores MLR model as well. Moreover, each of the variables, with the exception of educational appropriations, were of the opposite sign in their respective models. A plot of ACT scores and dropout rates presents a negative linear relationship supporting the MLR findings. It can then be reasoned that influencing ACT scores by means of these shared factors will also impact dropout rates and vice versa.
Our model was then validated by testing for normality and autocorrelation of residuals using normal QQ plots and the Dermot-Watson test. Homoscedasticity was evaluated using the Broich-Pagan and White's test.
Other items of note in any research investigation are, of course, sources of error. The data is only precise to the state level. As such, individual differences of school boards, cities, and other factors are not specifically accounted for. These differences may manifest as non-existent values in the dataset, which we replace with median values. The presence of median values in these cases introduce a possible source of error.
We sought to explain the relationships we discovered using other evidence and reasoning. However, these relationships do not necessarily imply causation and may arise due to other unseen factors.
Another source of error present in this investigation is that overly influential data points may have skewed the results, as shown by these influence plots. Such bias may be reduced if the investigation were performed using citywide data, as substantially more data points could be collected.
The initial null hypothesis was ultimately rejected by our findings, showing surprising and often unintuitive results. The long-term implications of these findings are extensive. Policymakers' debates for increasing teacher salaries, changing class sizes, and prioritizing student well-being can only be resolved using evidence that stems from rigorous statistical analysis. Evidence that only exists due to studies such as this one. This is why future studies that build upon the foundation provided by this investigation are so important. By using other variables, techniques, and data points, future research has the potential to transform the classroom of the 21st century.